My Inner Knowing, empowering you to find your compass for the journey. We are dedicated to supporting you to rediscover and trust your natural ability to navigate life each day by sharing insight and experience through the lens of two professional communicators and their guests. We intend to prompt internal inquiry that supports all those willing to explore a unique path.
I would love to learn more about your journey and even the time that you've recently spent away. I think that would.
It's a never-ending grab bag of I used to be a clerk of a Quaker meeting, and with the Quakers, I learned there's an activity which I'm sure is not uncommon in other faiths of people taking a talking stick and sharing, tell us about your spiritual journey. And so a person sits with the talking stick and they share their spiritual journey, and then it goes to the next person. You could be there for hours with that kind of thing. So
I've heard that. Yeah. Well, we would love to offer you the talking stick, Joel.
I don't know. I mean, I do want to say I really appreciate your feedback to me about the working with the attractions. I believe that as I talk about it in that book, that my experience of my parents and how they were in their relationship had, perhaps the most profound impact on me as a human being. I'm a big fan of, I think I may have mentioned this last time, of Michael Meade and his use of myth and story. And something that is a common theme in his work is this idea of, we're born into the world from one angle, as though we're, a blank slate that the parents say, okay, we're going to, give you everything. And then the other side is you're already born in with the imprint or the signature of your destiny, unbeknownst to your parents, right? And we actually and in our podcast, we talked about this idea of parenting and how, as a parent, you get to this point of recognition, maybe, of like, oh, what is this human being here for? And how can I support their coming into their own deeper self? But for the most part, many parents don't go there. Instead, it's like, how can I get, through this experience and get them out the door, And so the whole idea of the soul, or the deeper self, or the higher self, or the big self instead of the personality ego self, is something that we all carry within us, right?
Yeah.
So it's the seed of the spiritual journey. It's the seed of everything. So a child experiences their mother, and that has an imprint on them. In the the Eureka Enneagram work, it's the conservation instinct. How am I? Am I going to be okay? Do I have security? And it's associated with the abdomen and the intestinal everything that we have to do to secure ourselves. And then there's a relationship with the father, which is more. These are of course broad concepts, with the thoracic area, the heart, relationships, who am I with, how am I going to be with other people, how am I going to navigate my social life, but then there's also the head, like navigating the environment adaptation. So conservation, empathy, and adaptation, right? Um, Empathetic reasoning, um, uh, analogical reasoning, and analytical reasoning. And all of this is Oscar Ichazo, the original teachings of the Enneagram and the fixations. And there's also the child's experience of one's parents.
Yeah.
Not just my relationship to my mother, not my relationship to my father, but my relationship to both of them, and how well they did or did not get along and what they navigated. Because the child is watching this, and learning. And so I can talk about my journey, but I think anybody who talks about their journey would also include in that, what was it like living with that relationship?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that'd be lovely.
And that doesn't get talked about a lot, that there's not a lot out there on what was it like growing up with those two people trying to figure out their own growing up.
Yeah.
And so I just say that that's one framework, right?
Yeah.
To talk about the journey. Just in and of itself, that's a few days of conversation.
For it. We may need to schedule it, Joel, but we're up for it.
But that, to me, is where most of my understanding of life and what my spirit was brought here for was to do. I mean, my first book, Time and Intimacy, right? I mean, like, I have to figure this out. I have to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so am I beginning to answer? Is this what you were looking potentially for maybe in this?
Oh, Joel, we're open.
Yeah, and we don't have an agenda. It's yours.
Yeah. And it's a fascinating conversation. It would be fascinating for you to share that perspective.
Has anybody you've ever had on talk about this? Do you ever have this topic discussed? No. It's interesting because our culture is like, well, your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your mother, your relationship to your father, your relationship to your career, your calling, your spiritual path. But our parental relationships have such a profound impact on us.
Yes.
So, all I can begin to say there is that I knew something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And of course they divorced. And I think any adult who's an adult child of divorce has a special wrinkle, if you will, if not rift, in doing that work on their own journey in terms of how they understand their parents' walk into the divorce and everything else that happened around that. I am also in a step family, and I remember early on I would go to a step family's meeting, and I've been to a lot of workshops, a lot of spiritual work. And those meetings with people who are struggling to try and figure out how to do a step family, similar, very powerful, deep, difficult work, some of the most difficult work, especially when people are fresh from a divorce or they have, I've got 4 kids from the first marriage, 2 kids from the second marriage. You've got 3 kids from, right? You guys are looking at each other.
We know. We know.
And so maybe you can share as well, because this navigating these types of relationships and being okay with it, it's not all one big Greek family. It's not this perfect, like, we're going to get together and we're going to have a great time, Opa, that's not the way it is in the world. Those Greek family weddings, what are my big fat Greek wedding
Great
movie,
wedding.
right?
Mhm.
And even those are great because they show all these, nuances and such. So where am I going with all this? I'm just opening up the topic, right?
Mhm.
That I think is one that's just not discussed.
Yeah, agreed.
Why do you think we don't discuss it, Joel?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at why, except that I know as a child of divorce, there's so many wounds there,
Yes.
so painful, and even, of course, traumatic, that it's difficult to talk about, I mean, I have some adult child of divorce books, and I'm sure they talk about in there, as I recall, shame. There's something wrong with me uh, because I don't have an intact family. Um, and so, but, that's not always the case. Some people have divorces that are very amicable and the kids are taken care of very well, So I don't want to make a broad statement about it, but I think it's the shame and the trauma of loss, and of uh, pain of separation, which reactivates even earlier, you know, uh, issues around abandonment and um, loneliness. Um, so that's the short answer.
You mentioned your how you pieced together your soul journey with the experience as a child. As in, I think you were suggesting that if that was supposed to happen for your growth, but you didn't say those words, but you tied the two together somehow. So could you explain that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's all of the psychology of myth and the myth of psychology, and Michael Mead's work and Carl Jung's work,
Mm-hmm.
where we start to review, we recollect, we contemplate how did we get to this place in our life,
Mhm.
and where those wounds are, become the very source of growth. So, I mean, that's standard in many modern psychological, approaches to healing. Um, so that's that's all I was saying there. It's a pretty common theme, and
Yeah.
I think part of that is your relationship to your parents' relationship. So I could share stories, I think, without getting into too much detail of, you know, um, parents judging each other, uh, parents maybe using a child to get the empathy that they're not getting from the other parent, uh, parentification of the child, the Karpman triangle, victim, perpetrator, hero, which can happen in any family where the child can play all three.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, there have been so many biographies on that. One that I really like is Gene Wilder's biography of his. How did he become a comedian? Well, he was playing into his own mother's needs, and he went through his own therapy, and in many ways was one of the first people to talk about these things. Um, so, you kind of figure out, how did I get here? And maybe I don't remember the detail, but in his case, it was something like, well, he made her happy, right? And then there's the whole Oedipal thing, I mean, it just goes on and on. There's not one part of this that it's like you pull one thread, there's so many different parts to it.
Yeah.
The son as the king, the daughter as the queen, the daughter as the princess, my princess. What does that mean? What weight does that carry? The other day, my granddaughter said to me, well, my 7-year-old said, well, if you and my wife, well, if you guys break up, then maybe, right? Children have their own fantasies, about these things.
Yeah.
So it's a rich terrain for understanding where our soul is going, not just in terms of being an adult, whatever gender, you're going to be identified with, but also an adult person in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of your gender identity or even your sexual identity. So I think this is a universal theme, and it would be wrong for me to act like an expert here. You asked me, talk about what my journey is about. And I just think that's an area that we don't talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you thinking?
I was just thinking about the conversation we had the other day. We recorded an episode that will come out next month. And yours will come out in December. So we've got, we're not giving anything away, but we talked about the impact of, witnessing our parents in domestic violence and the impact that had on, us growing up, and the impact that had on our future relationships, whichever way it went. But I guess that was a little bit that you and I stepped into.
Sure.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's difficult.
So you both of you had that experience of witnessing parental, domestic, parent-to-parent violence.
Yeah. Mine
was parent-to-parent violence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a little bit with my parents. I remember a particular incident when I was about 3, very clearly. My mom throwing books at my dad across the living room. And, obviously it stuck with me. I can picture it very clearly and what she was wearing and, and even like what their relationship was. I can, clearly think about how that impacted me. And still, they're 82 and 84 right now and still married, and can consider the dynamic of their relationship throughout the years on me. But our specific conversation was the violence, that we encountered. Walker's sharing was more the step parent piece.
Yeah. Both of my parents were married 4 times, so I must have chosen that path to experience it multiple times. So yeah.
And in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So without, I think this topic can be very difficult for people, of course. So we're not here in a therapeutic role talking about this.
Right.
But I think the key is, what strengths do we develop as a result?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not just strengths that are simply compensations or adaptations, but rather, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's part of our innate, destiny to work this through. There are many traditions that say you choose your parents. When you come into the earth plane, there are traditions that say your parents don't choose you, you choose your parents. And you decide, imagining the spirit hovering, who am I gonna where am I going to enter? Right. And so if you're in a situation with 4, step parents, there's, okay, what's the strength? What's the skill? What's the aptitude? What's the special genius, right? That grew from that or is still growing from that,
Sure.
I think in my case, I think there's so much. I think the two sides, that on the mother's side, a very deep, profound sadness and empathy for sadness for people who are very lost and struggling and have health risk, right? And how that can be precipitated by heartbreak. And seeing that many people are in crisis because of heartbreak, because of betrayal, because of thwarted expectations from a primary attachment. And on the father's side, it's more of the passion for making an impact, being seen and being known and being heard. So it's almost like polar opposites. And a lot of my work, my training, I do training all the time, train the trainer around the idea of resilience to thriving and health consciousness and team awareness and leadership. All the different topics that we cover. I think at the root of it is this desire to bring these opposites together, to help those who are in this position of not listening to do a better job of listening, and to help those people who are not heard to do a better job of speaking up. And if I had to summarize it, I think that's one of the gifts that came and is still coming from having worked through my parents' dysfunctional relationship. Does that make sense?
It absolutely. I'm putting it in context myself, and it's just fascinating when you have just putting it in your paradigm, where I fell in our analysis, and it doesn't surprise me that I would be integrating would be one of my primary attractions, and I call it a freeze response, but you call it stagnation on the lower end vibration of that. And so, but I can also see the bigger picture that's still coming. It's what I expressed to you in the email earlier today. And so it's, there are so many things that we gain through those experiences, like resilience, resolve, imagination. And then pairing the two together over the course of a lifetime is, that's where I find myself. But there were lots of challenges, and the one thing that fascinates me as we go along this path is our role in choosing those things, or in building new barriers that get in the way. And so it seems to be a common theme that I come up with the people that we talk to is, why do you suppose that is the nature of our experience, that we can throw our own barriers in our way when you have this soul that is there, it has a purpose, this trajectory, and then it's not the easy button.
Well, there's so much in what you just said. If I can respond to that, can I?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
So integration, you're talking about the being attracted to integration. So of course, I'm hearing having these multi-layered step family. What the WTF is going on here, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It was a train wreck.
Right. So you're, as a child, and as you're maturing into adulthood, you're like, you have to figure this out. You just have to figure it out. It's a compulsion to figure this out. So your attraction to synthesizing and integrating has been with you for a long time.
Right.
So that's one thing. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other thing I'm hearing is at the same time that has overridden or gotten in the way of another desire you have, which is to use your imagination and to be innovative and to express a different part of you where you don't have to always, pull everybody together and make sure they're all getting along and harmony. And it's like, enough already. I want to have a life outside of having to integrate. Is that what I'm also hearing?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and a desire over many years to experience life and have adventure and go places and experience people, have conversations like this. But I'm 56, so it's taken, I've had to go through a lot of barriers that were given to me or that I created along the way to get to this point, but it's happening, and yeah. So it's just such an interesting process. But if we put it in terms of what we're trying to do is, there's certain events in people's lives or, turning points, decision points. And we're trying to get put a finger on what is it, what's the guidance system that you came to at different points along the way, like for me, coming out of that background, my life could have been completely different if I, chosen a path of, drugs or whatever it may be, or to just succumb and not continue trying to improve myself, or just go to sleep, which is what happened until I got cancer. And the cancer is what so bizarrely saved my life.
That's amazing. I mean, listening to you, congratulations or blessings, because in reflecting right there, you're weaving your own story in a way that's positive and promising, but speaks to that desire for life, for spirit, for growth. And I think so. That's great that you're able to see all that. And then I also heard you say we also throw up barriers. We throw up our own blocks. So I'm assuming there's what you're talking about there is that even cancer saved your life. And even though you're now on an arc of positive growth and change, you can feel it when you stumble or you smack yourself in the head. Did I just do that again?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So that's a good thing because, again, going back to the Enneagram, the little ego, the ego personality, doesn't want you to always, it's scary.
Exactly.
Right? Learning how to integrate and figuring all that out took a lot of time and effort to survive. And so those automatic mechanisms are well entrenched because they reinforced a survival. So now your ego was like, what are you trying to do here? We're having everything's going okay. You want to change things up, right? I mean, this is classic stuff. And I think it's one thing to throw up a barrier or get into the fixation or the compulsion. It's another thing to see it when it happens and feel that alarm or shock. What? That's the awakening point, right? That's the catching of oneself. I'll send you this video we just did. That's catching ourselves with compassion at those points where we throw up those barriers. That's really what this is all about. That mindful, at the end of the day, that's what mindfulness, quote, should really direct us all to. Instead of beating ourselves up, getting into a fight, recreating the parental drama, being a victim, perpetrator, or hero, or whatever we do, just like, oh, there it is again. So what I'm hearing you say is you've been doing that.
Oh, absolutely. We want it all to, we reach the destination, and it's not that way. I have to continue to catch myself, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Joel, when you get to that point yourself, where you catch yourself, what's your process? How do you hold yourself in compassion and know what the next step is?
Well, first, I think it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that what I would share would apply to anybody, but the anger, fear, and sadness, because I'm an emotional type, right? Is where it works out for me. I think other people, it's like, dislike, be critical is another place that it shows up for people who may be more in the head space, right? And actual hate and love, right? Or, complete ambivalence for people who are in another space. But for me, it's fear, sadness, and anger. And I can have a literally 2-sentence conversation with my wife and experience fear, sadness, and anger all at the same time. So what it's like for me is like, okay, don't say anything at this point. Take a breath, pause, try and say something loving. So it goes back to the relationship thing again, right? Mm-hmm. That it's do I want to recreate and perpetuate the very drama that I tried to get myself out of here?
Right.
Even in small little ways, and that's the choice. So I think for me, fear of abandonment, fear of not being recognized for my contribution, sadness because I'm not being recognized for my contribution, and what the fuck, anger, do we have to go through this again? So all of that stuff happens so quickly. Yeah. And so for me, I think on my better days, I catch myself, which may be 50-50.
I'm laughing with, commiseration.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It can get pretty loud in the house. But, at the end of the day, at this point, we're going to be married 30 years. Knock on wood, right? That we sort of have a little fun with it, You have to have like a little fun with it rather than take myself or each other seriously. So that's the other piece. Humor. Yes,
nice.
You have to not, like I say in book 1, don't take any of it seriously.
Mhm.
We talked about that
Yeah,
the first time we talked.
yeah, yeah.
We're back to that.
That's okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm okay with it.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, Joel, for you, when you're thinking about the impact of the parental relationship on us, and again, I know it's not something that we talk about often. I guess in exploring that, is it something that you feel like you've done much work in or studied or explored with people specifically around that? Or do you feel like this is something that you want to do more exploring around with people?
Well, there's so much that I've done, and there's so many things out there. You know, was it the old Hoffman process?
Oh, yeah, I did that.
Yeah. So that, that's pretty deep work
Yeah, it
around
is.
that very thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, one tool that I haven't used in a while, but maybe it's coming back, is you just write on a page, as many pages, even a notebook, all the adjectives and memories, first all the adjectives, right?
Yeah.
That you associate with that relationship. And while you're doing it, you're always deep breathing, deep breathing, lighting a candle, uh, almost like a sacrament, all the ideas you have, all the memories you have, all the emotions you have. And with the deep breathing, cultivating compassion for the parents, like recognizing they didn't know any better, right? There's nothing to judge there. They did their best. They brought you into the world. So there's also getting back in touch with a very deep gratitude. So compassion for their limitations and gratitude for their coming together.
Yeah.
Right. And then kind of the recognition of you are now able to benefit from that, and recognizing that you're also not them, right? So those are the kind of my understanding of the core pillars of that deep work, so that you can honor the parents as it says, right? Honor your mother and father. In the deeper spiritual way, not the quote, rules of the 10 Commandments, but the deep honoring of the mother and the father, processing your grief around that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but then getting back in touch with the gratitude, and then the letting go, right? The letting go, which never happens, as a born and raised Jewish, I do my best to light the yahrzeit candles, right? When at the anniversary of their death. So you're always remembering them. And as part of that faith, every year you get a chance to remember and do that memorial. And part of that memorial is exactly what I just described. You honor them, you wish their soul the best journey possible. You thank them for what they gave you. It's powerful. So
Yeah. Did you do the Hoffman process, Joel?
I didn't do, but in Arica there was a similar process. But do you want to share your experience? I mean,
Oh, yeah, sure. So I went through the Hoffman process, 10, 11 years ago. I don't remember exactly. And there was a significant amount of pre-process work that we did. I think it was, basically like 40 pages of things to think about ahead of time, to increase your awareness around family system patterns in all the different areas. And then to bring a picture of yourself as a child was part of the process. And you put that picture in like the clear front of the vinyl binder that you got, when you got there, that kind of like laid out everything. And when I went, I think it was 7 days. I think it used to be 10, but I think when I went, it was 7. They have reduced it to 7 days. And how I experience it, in like an overview is like they're trying to help you grow up, like your little self into more of an adult self. And while I had appreciation prior to that for the things that I learned from my parents that were things that supported me well on my journey, that process of really spending that amount of time and focus and energy into exploring that whole relationship, them individually, and then again, some as a unit, absolutely increased my compassion for them. Even like yesterday, I was with my parents and my mom's been sick with an infection they haven't been able to get under control. And watching her struggle, watching her be in physical pain, watching her be more passive aggressive and grouchy than she would normally be, watching my dad not know what to do with that, watching his pain and feeling like he's doing something wrong, watching him engage with her, like they're young, like, why do you have to be so grouchy? And not have that awareness that he's afraid, that, and that she's in, that her passive aggressive grouchy is because her physical pain is, and her own fear, of having like a PICC line in and them having to come, and give her IV antibiotics twice a day to see if they can, get this infection under control.
Oh my God. So how are you doing?
An awareness of, so many things. Compassion for their struggle, compassion for as far as they have been able to go in their lifetime relationally. More of the realization of the amount of fear that they are in regards to their own mortality, and the helplessness. So really very much sensing and feeling and observing, the whole system, happening. So it doesn't make me grouchy at them for their struggle. Grateful that I started this journey and that I keep on this journey.
Mm.
I don't want passive aggressive and frustration and grouchy and anger to be where I go when I'm sick and struggling. I want that period of time in my own life to have more freedom, even as I age and am less able in some ways. Yeah, Joel, it's a lot.
I mean, how has your own previous work, whether it was doing the Hoffman process or doing this work around compassion, how has that played a role in how you're processing what's happening now with them?
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't have to be in their process. I can hold on to myself, and not join in, not play whatever role I was, trained to play. Yeah, holding on to myself for sure. And compassion, the ability to see, to consider others' emotional experience, when, something that they're doing or saying is particularly triggering, for me. Yeah, I was thinking it was, how the universe works. My youngest son was texting me last night about how a player on his volleyball team was particularly aggressive to him yesterday, and said something to him that felt very cruel. And it was helpful for me to have my own awareness of what my parents were going through, because I was then able to say, because this guy, he was trying to play through his back pain, and it got so bad that he ended up having to step out of the game. And so I was saying, what I don't know if this is helpful to you or not, but what I've learned over the years is when people are in physical pain, we tend to see the parts of them that are still hurting, younger. And maybe that's what was happening, for this person. If it's not his pattern, to engage with you that way, maybe he's just hurting. And so I feel like, Joel, it's all the work that I've done has offered me so much, just and not just being able to not step into a role in my family, but also to, I don't know, reinforce the made up stories we make about how other people engage with us, and that we take it all so personally. Just trying to, consider what might that other person be going through, not as an excuse, right? I always say not as an excuse, but genuinely just.
It's perspective taking, compassion, and empathy as the solution.
Yeah.
In and of itself. There isn't necessarily what I'm hearing you say is that you, and I think people listening to this, you're able to recognize that you are not your parents.
Yes.
Able to help your son get distance, but not distance without compassion. So you're distancing yourself in a positive way with compassion on one side, and helping your son distance himself with compassion on the other side.
Yes.
And it is the fundamentals of Buddhism, to bring that energy that in Buddhism, that's what they say Bodhichitta is. It's not just awareness, it's awareness with this deep penetrating compassion. So you almost can't separate compassion from mindfulness in its truest form. And so you're demonstrating that in these stories. And I think to kind of help I want to take a moment to just encapsulate that people who are listening to this, they may recognize their relationship with their parents at whatever stage of life they're on. If you're younger and you're listening to this, you may not be at that place where you can have empathy because you're still angry, sad, and afraid and struggling with the trauma legacy that was handed to you. If you're middle age, you're not able to process this because you're busy raising your own children, making mistakes all the time. And, you're thankful that you can, take out the garbage because you just have enough time to do that, right? Because they're not going to do it. So this is all a bunch of hoity-toity stuff. And then if you're at an older, and you're dealing with aging parents, it's not just pain. It's pain in the face of potential death.
Yes.
Which is the most overwhelming experience that a human being can have. So I'll give you a story. I know somebody who was completely unreconciled with a parent who had abandoned them. And when that parent was coming back, they would not even consider, any reconciliation because of the many years of wounding. And there's no judgment there because that was a healthy thing for that person to do.
Right.
And that, no, I can't accept you back, even though you're in deep pain and need. And so I think we have to be careful to idealize this idea of reconciliation.
Yes.
And so the reason I'm bringing that up is that as people we don't know who's going to be listening to this.
Right. Right.
And there should be no shame that you have to have gotten reconciled. There should be no, personal retribution, or beating yourself up because and the truth is some of our deepest and wounds come from parents who are perpetrators.
Yes.
And so in framing this conversation, I had no idea this is where we were going to go today. But I will say that it has informed me in terms of really trying to understand how to make intimacy work, right? Which is what I think brought us together, right? How can we make intimacy work? How can we learn from these pathologies? How can we? And I want to give a shout out to people who are struggling in the modern age with minority stress because of their gender identity or sexual identity. That there are many people now who have that additional layer on top of this, and what does a relationship look like? It's got to be very scary. And in certain places of the world, it's more than scary, it's life-threatening.
Right.
And so, as we talk about these issues, I think it's important to put some caveats in, around these things, and recognize that this is some of the most difficult work that a human being does. I mean, many addictions, the relationship addictions, romance addiction, sex addiction, relationship addiction, are sometimes, some people believe, fundamental to all other addictions. And they come in part from those insecure, avoidant failures at early childhood bonding because of the parental dysfunction. So, we're not talking about a light topic here. Sorry. So, okay. All right. I need a drink of water. So, yeah, I don't know. What is it with you guys? How do you do it? How do you bring this stuff out? I don't know.
We don't know.
I'm all a mess now.
Aw.
Oh,
It's okay. But I hope that made sense. That I thought it'd be important, since this is being recorded, to put some of those thoughts out there, and wondered if you had anything to add to that.
Mm. No, it's interesting. I mean, what comes to mind, for me when you were sharing, when my youngest child began identifying as male, and then thinking about the relationship that her dad and I have as parents, to her. Probably as unsure of how to be or respond. It was something that we handled very similarly. And even though we said we'll do our best, to support you and understand, he and I weren't either one was like staking their claim in regards to what's right. And grateful that was what we chose. Just thinking about how they experience us as parents relationally in that part of their life. And ultimately, the long-term impact, negatively or positively, that had, right? Because I can have my own experience of how we responded, right? But it doesn't mean that they have that experience. But it makes me curious now to go have that conversation.
Well, that's the journey. That's the story, starting off the conversation. It's a never-ending story.
Right.
Because the healing that comes from having conversations with our parents comes because there's a willingness to go back and, re-narrate, reconsolidate, not just, we're not just machines reviewing the text, right? There's the transformation of the text. And so, I'm glad that you're curious. I think hopefully people listening to this will be curious about what was it like for my children. But even what was it like for my parents to have to deal with me as a child?
Joel.
Right? It's we're all anyway. I think how this relates to just to kind of wrap it up a little bit. In all of these things, there's chaos, right? There's the energy and of chaos, that the tearing apart, the breaking down, the not coming together, the disharmony, the dysfunction, right? And at the same time, there's also the opposite of the form, the structure, the very fact that there is a relationship even to begin with, a family structure, a family unit to begin with. And the role of the other people, like, being grandparents, they're part of that, And, while you were talking, I was thinking on the form side of the genogram and all the different therapeutic modalities that use genograms, which I have done and I love. So that's there as well. So to help people navigate, this conversation from the perspective of the radiant forces, understanding that there's always going to be chaos, understanding there's always going to be form, and there's always going to be the karmic, after effects. What actions did I take? Mark earlier said, what choices, these decision points, right, that you were talking about at those points in your journey. If I didn't make these decisions, would I have ended up here or here? But I believe overall, though, there's always the conditions that love at the end, I believe, wins the day, because none of this would happen without love, right? We wouldn't be able to even have these conversations and navigate it without there being some coming together and recognizing that we're all growing, and that we have to give everybody not only slack, I distinctly remember telling my dad on more than one occasion, would you give me some fucking slack? Cut me some slack, And so I just put it all together to say that that's what relationship is. Navigating all of that together, and not by oneself. It's crazy. How can you navigate all that by yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't get very far.
But I still think I can do it.
Yes.
Rugged individualism.
Thank you, Joel. Yeah. Another great conversation with you. What?
I had no idea that this is what we were going to talk about.
Yeah, that's okay. It's good.
They just go where they go is what happens
Yeah.
with us. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Thing.
So did you have a nice time away?
On the beach. I
Nice.
cannot tell you. Speaking about this, I am so grateful for my bride. And when you're alone together for many days without anybody else, it's almost like I just dissolve. It's completely dissolved, and it's like it's something there's nothing I've ever experienced like that, just like not just nothing, just dissolving, just flowing and dissolving, and no drama,
Yeah.
picking up glass on the shore. We have like probably 20 pounds of broken glass that we've collected over the years. So,
I love sea glass. That's fun.
Yeah.
yeah, colored glass.
Mhm.
So, and we got a blue one. We got a blue one this time.
Yay.
It's rare.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah, I'll send you a picture.
sounds lovely. Good.
Yeah. Where'd you guys go?
In Connoisseur of Time, I talk about the very first story is we always go to Crystal Beach off of the coast of Galveston.
Okay.
Boulevard Peninsula. You take the ferry from Galveston to this peninsula, and that's where we go.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It was amazing because it's like nobody ever knows about it. It's sort of like nowhere, and people like, why would you go there? And hurricanes, people make this thing about hurricanes, that these people get wiped out by hurricanes all the time and rebuild. It's sort of like this whole other culture that's there.
Interesting. Wow. We will have to check it out.
Nothing there. There's nothing.
There's nothing there.
Not much. No, not much.
That's the dissolving part, which is awesome.
That's right. Dissolving part. So, but thank you. And you want to share
Yeah.
anything about your journeys? Anything you guys have done a lot in the past couple of months.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. Well, I would say, I think we dissolved at Esalen. That was lovely. We sat in those clawfoot hot spring
Wow.
bathtubs
Above
above the ocean.
the ocean. Mm.
Yeah, several times a day, every day, and just in silence. I mean, just being, and it was dissolving. I like that word. And then Sedona, you want to share that?
It was, we did a detox cleanse, so it was um what was it? It was great and it was extremely challenging all at the same time. So would I do it again anytime soon? No.
But you
However, I think for me, just the series of those 3 vacations is I don't know, creating lots of change in mindset, which is great. I'm really thrilled. So it's
Yeah.
that was a challenge though, the eating restrictions and all of it.
5 hours of qigong every day,
Yeah.
starting at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
All of that. But his 60-mile solo hike at Lake Superior was,
That was crazy.
yeah.
where did you do that?
It's called the Superior Hiking Trail. It's on the north shore of Lake Superior. If you go to Duluth, it goes from Duluth all the way up to Canada. I did 60 miles in the middle. I think it's total 246.
Were
So-
you up there during the Northern Lights?
No.
Just
It was
curious.
beautiful.
Yeah.
But boy, I didn't prepare properly as far as carrying a pack, to get used to that. And then it was just physically, mentally, emotionally challenging and lots of opportunity for growth. So, and we did a podcast episode on it
Yeah.
called Water Wolves and the Stardust Telephone.
Yeah.
I'll have to listen to that.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
It's good.
So that's amazing. Your own journey, Mark. I want to acknowledge at this point in your life that you're doing something that many people don't ever do, right?
Yeah.
They just go to the next stage. And so for some reason, I'm curious if you know the answer, why?
When you were saying that, the rage against the dying of the light came to mind, but that's not my story. It's what I think is it's my time to bloom. I just do. It's a knowing thing when I say that. And there's been just a lot of denial, a lot of barrier, tossing, a lot of disassociation, role, getting stuck in a role and not having any purpose associated with it. I did the lawyer thing. And this, what I see more and more clearly is the transition, out of that. There's still parts of it that I enjoy, but doing these other things is opening up purpose. And the purpose that I'm finding, as I told you in the letter, is experiencing people and learning. It's part of the adventure for me. And so, like I said, getting wisdom from you and from everybody else is it's like finally something is energizing me in a way that I never have been. And the other part too is it's a really nice growth period for our relationship, which I have always thought was good, but it's just better. And also being able to see the divergence, we're together, but it's okay to have, your separate pieces too.
Mhm.
Anyway, your work is part of that process, just in, because it took me some time to get, I don't think our brains don't process the same way. It took me, I'm behind in that understanding, but I feel like I'm getting a lot better understanding, and it's helping me put it into perspective as part of this growth.
Can you say what that is? Can you say anything about what that understanding is?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably end up saying what I told you in the email mostly, but it's like, recognizing that her need to teach and to nurture, I was separate from that, because I'm like, why it's not my job to teach everybody, has been something that I've said before out of reactivity, I think, um, and when you first asked us, you asked Theresa, why are you doing this? Walker, why are you doing this? And I said, because of her, I want to support her. And I do want to support her, and I support her in I'm learning how to nurture and to teach. I'm also reminding her to nurture herself. I don't know, we're helping each other move towards that center, is what I think.
Agreed. Mhm.
And she's helping me to activate, going down paths that I didn't anticipate, but also, and it's not it's in an inviting way, not in a telling me what to do kind of way. There's a big difference between those two. And so I'm getting lost, but there's a whole lot going on for me.
No, I'm glad that you, go ahead. I want to interrupt you.
I'm good.
So I want to highlight this is so important, because in the addictive process, there's a tendency to think it's either this way or that way.
Mm.
It's either black or white. It's either I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. Or, or you're the nurturer, I'm not going to do that. That's your thing. This is my thing.
Yeah.
And that's, but as we grow, it becomes a both and situation.
Right. And
that's what I'm hearing, is that it's not just happening in one area. You're able to see the dualities and have them dissolve, and hold that space. So there's an honoring of the difference rather than a avoiding or hiding from it. And I want to just highlight that, because that is the basis for intimacy, and it's not what we see in the world, right? There's so much divisiveness. There's so much, you're either going to vote this person or you're going to vote that person. And the world, people don't understand that the world is set up, the culture is set up to not invite, but to tell, right? So
Right.
I'm glad you're articulating your own growth, especially coming from being a lawyer, because that's where lawyers thrive, in the world of telling and in the world of black and white.
Mhm.
Yes.
So it's a major change. It's something not to, it's not to be taken lightly.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's recognizing the need for the opening or the innovating, as something that has been there but has been blocked, and now it's becoming unblocked. It just, like I said, it just feels like the two ends are pulling together, and yeah,
On the shores of Gitche Gumee.
love her. Bottom line.
Say that again, with the helper.
I said I love her. That's the bottom line. I mean, we're good.
Right, it's great.
In that in that all kinds of senses, but that's part of it. So anyway, I wax on.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, always is. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to explore life with you. We encourage curiosity, self-growth, and we strive to be more compassionate every day.